In this hands-on exercise, I'm going to create and deploy the ISO 27001 blueprint sample. To create Azure blueprints, you can search for blueprints, and immediately it takes you to the getting started window, which allows you to create a blueprint. You can apply it to a scope and then track assignments. Click on create, and there are 5 sample blueprints which you could deploy to your environment, or you could start with a blank blueprint. I want to use the ISO 27001 shared services blueprint and apply it to my enterprise architecture subscription. The ISO 27001 ASC SQL workload blueprint is an extension to the ISO 27001 shared services sample blueprint. I will use this sample, and the first basic information I need to do is provide it a resource name. I'll call this ISO 27001. I'll leave the blueprint description the same and specify the management group to which I want to assign this blueprint to. So I already have ISO 27001 management group defined. I will specify the subscription later on when I'm assigning the blueprint to a subscription. The next step is to specify artifacts. Now, one thing you need to know is that I haven't defined all of these resources in my subscription, but nonetheless, I'm going to assign and publish this blueprint, and eventually it's going to give me errors because I do not have most of the resources defined or the environment set up to support this blueprint. But it will help me to demonstrate the use of versioning in blueprints. So in this sample, we have a couple of policy assignments, Azure Resource Manager templates, and resource group artifacts. I will specify the parameters upon assignment. I will save this draft, and once the draft is saved, I'll go to blueprint definitions, in which I have my ISO 27001 blueprint. It is currently in draft mode. It must be published before it can be assigned and deployed. To publish this blueprint, I go to Publish Blueprint. In the new page on the right, I have to provide a version number. I'll use version 1.0.0. I can specify the change notes. I would say new blueprint and click publish. Instead of draft, it tells me the latest version of my blueprint, which is the first version. And I currently do not have any unpublished changes. Now I can assign this blueprint to a subscription. So in the basics section, I will specify the subscription as Enterprise Architect 1. I can modify the assignment name. I'll leave this as default. I can specify a location. Basically, blueprints use managed identity to deploy your resources, which also requires a location. If we had different versions, I could change the versions from here. Now, the creation of consistent environments at scale is only truly valuable if there is a mechanism to maintain that consistency. The locking mode applies to the blueprint assignment, and it has 3 options: don't lock, read only, and do not delete. The locking mode is configured during artifact deployment when you're trying to assign that blueprint. Now, if the lock is set to don't lock, resources aren't protected by blueprints. If it is set to do not delete, the resources can be altered but cannot be deleted. If it is set to read only, the resource cannot be altered in any way. That is, no changes are allowed and it cannot be deleted. I will leave this as the default, don't lock. I'll also leave the managed identity as the default system assigned. Now, the parameters defined in this section are used by many of the artifacts in the blueprint definition to provide consistency. I will leave the blueprint organization name as contours of the default. I'll leave the default location. This could also be changed. I will specify allowed locations in my blueprint. I want to restrict these to Australian regions. I will leave the shared services subnet address prefix the same. I'll also leave the log analytics configurations the default or the hard-coded values. For some reason, it doesn't allow me to specify allowed locations or allowed locations for resource group. Nonetheless, I'll leave this the way they are. I can specify a storage stock keeping unit. I would want all subscriptions to use the standard geo-redundant storage. I can also specify the virtual machine stock keeping unit. I want to use the basic stock keeping unit. For resource types to audit diagnostic logs, I will restrict these to my compute resources. So we're looking at virtual machines and virtual machine scale sets, and also to a few database resources. For log analytics template, I will use a free tier. I will leave the firewall configurations the default. I currently do not have a key vault template or a key vault resource defined, but I'll specify imaginary values. I also do not have Jumpbox resources set up. I expect this deployment to fail anyways, but I'm only going to use it to demonstrate how to apply blueprints in your environment. So once I've entered the various parameters, I'm going to click Assign. Now it tells me blueprint assignment fails, and it gives the reason for this failure. But again, since this is for demonstration purposes, I'm going to ignore these. And I'll cancel these and try to modify this blueprint sample again. So I go to Edit Blueprint. I'll leave the basic information the same. I'll go to Artifacts. Now, there are some resources which I haven't created or which I need to define, and I don't have any values for the parameters. For example, I haven't created a key vault resource, so I'm going to delete or remove this artifact. Remove artifact. I also do not have a Jumpbox resource, so I'm going to remove this artifact. So basically, you can always edit your sample or your blueprint by removing or editing the values of each artifact. I also do not have an Active Directory domain services resource. I'm going to remove this artifact. Once I am done, I go back and save the draft. So it tells me I have unpublished changes. To publish my changes, I go to Publish Blueprint. Again, it asks me to specify a version for this change. Previously, it was version 1.0.0. Now I'm going to specify version 1.0.1. I will say removed artifacts. Now, once I publish this blueprint, I can go and try to reassign this blueprint again. Specify the subscription. And as you see, I have now two versions of this blueprint definition. I could decide to reuse version 1.0.0 or use version 1.0.1. I'll leave the other parameters the same. Specify stock keeping unit. Again, I cannot specify the allowed locations. That's fine. I'll specify a stock keeping unit for my virtual machine resource. And leave the other parameters the same. So as you notice, I do not have the Jumpbox artifacts or the Active Directory artifacts, which is okay by me. I'll click Assign. And again, my assignment fails, but that's fine. It tells me that I haven't specified the list of allowed locations. So since it's not giving me the option to specify this list of allowed locations, I'm going to hard code those locations. Again, I go back to my blueprint definitions, click edit blueprint, go to artifacts, and here I'll specify or hard code these artifact locations. So by default, this value should be specified when the blueprint is assigned. Since it's not giving me that option, I'll hard code this location. I would like to restrict this to Australia. So Australia Central 2, Australia Southeast, and Australia East. I'll save that. I also specify the locations for my resource group. I want them to be in the same location. Uncheck these. Specify Australia East, Australia Southeast, Australia Central, and Australia Central 2. And now I'm going to save this draft. So I have unpublished changes. I go to publish blueprint, specify a newer version. So the previous one was 1.0.1, 0.2. I'll say I specified locations for virtual machines and resource groups, and click publish. The next step is to assign this blueprint. I go to assign blueprint, and again I have more versions of my blueprint. Specify the subscription as Enterprise Architecture 1. The allowed locations have been hard-coded, including the allowed locations for resource groups, which is okay. Specify the storage storekeeping unit as standard geo-redundant storage. Choose a basic virtual machine storekeeping unit. Specify resources for diagnostics. And leave the other items the same and click assign. Now I've succeeded in assigning this blueprint to my subscription. To monitor my subscription, I can go to assign blueprints. It takes roughly about an hour depending on your setup, it could take as much as an hour for the provisioning state to move to full deployment. But again, my objective was to demonstrate how to assign the ISO 27001 shared services blueprint to your subscription. In the next lecture, we're going to look at how to use Azure Monitor to effectively manage your cloud infrastructure to achieve speed and control.